Hi, I'm Bob Johnson. I'm the chairman of the Department of Linguistics and Interpreting at Gallaudet. Today I'm going to be talking about a topic that is not directly related to my work or to deafness, but which is related to my favorite avocation in life, which is fly fishing. This may seem like a strange topic for a more or less technical discussion, but in fact, fly fishing is a combination of art, technology, and natural history. And in order to do it well, one must be acquainted with all three of these things. I've been fly fishing since I was 7 years old, and it's become a part of my life that means a great deal to me. Every summer, I need to get to Yellowstone Park, where there are nice trout streams. I need to catch fish, and I need to let them go. I will explain all of that as we go along. The first thing that one must understand about fly fishing is that it's not fishing in the sense of looking for meat. If I want to eat a trout, I can go to Safeway and pick one out of a tank with a net, and it will cost me a lot less money than if I were to eat one of the trout that I catch in Yellowstone. I estimate the cost of the trout that I catch in Yellowstone at $75 a pound, and that's why I need to let them go, because I can't afford to eat meat that costs $75 a pound. The art of fly fishing has to do with an appreciation of nature and an ability to learn enough about the behavior of an ecology that you can make a rather smart, cold-blooded animal think that it's getting a free meal. This involves tricking it with a lure that we call a fly. We call it a fly because it looks like an insect. Now, to understand why that's important, you need to understand something about the ecology of a trout stream. Trout in particular will only live in a particular kind of water where there's a particular kind of feed. And the feed that they prefer are very small insects, aquatic insects, which have a rather interesting lifestyle. They, of course, hatch from eggs like all insects do, but their parents had laid the eggs on the surface of the trout stream. The eggs sink to the bottom and begin to grow. The insect will go through 4 stages before it dies. The first stage is called a nymph stage, N-Y-M-P-H. At this stage, the insect looks a lot like a cockroach, but it lives under the water. It has gills and can breathe under the water, and it lives there for roughly a year. The fish love nymphs, and they probably compose about 80% of a trout's diet. So that means that the trout eat a lot of food from the bottom. At a particular day that's biologically determined by a clock in the trout, the nymph begins to, or the insect begins to shed its shell, and it swims to the surface of the water. This stage we call an emerger. It sits for a moment on the surface of the water, floating along and looking very desirable to a trout, because now it's come out from under its rock and it's easier to get at. And within moments, it crawls out of its exoskeleton and becomes a different looking insect. Now it's a beautiful long insect with long tail and upright wings that are almost transparent. But because it's wet and because it's just transposed from a water-breathing animal to an air-breathing animal, it needs to sit on the surface of the water for a moment. At this stage, we call it a dun, D-U-N-N. And it, as I say, it looks entirely different from the nymphal stage. So it sits on the water for a minute, drying its wings, and then it flies into the air, where it lives for 1 day. During that day, it has a flurry of sexual activity, because all of its other friends who hatched on that same day are out looking for the same kind of activity. Something like a disco bar. So they do what they do in the air, And then they return to the water to lay their eggs. The females come back to lay their eggs. The males spend themselves, as it were, and die on the water. That kind of reduces the desirability of that particular lifestyle. The females come back, sit on the water, and drop their eggs. And the eggs go down into the water, and exactly 1 year later to the day, the eggs will hatch, and the cycle will repeat. Now, this is what trout eat. A good-sized trout will eat 2,300 bugs a day. But the trick is to figure out how to make your lure look like what they're eating. So you have to understand a lot about the trout, too. You need to understand water conditions, times of day that cause them to do it. And for some reason, all the trout in the stream decide to eat the same stage of insect at the same time, and the same species. In a good trout stream, there will be 30 or 40 different species of these bugs, and all the fish will only be eating one stage of one species at one moment. So this is why I say that you have to know something about natural history. The technology of it comes in how you're going to present the food information to the fish. And first you have to prepare yourself. To do this, you get into your waders, which are a lot like the bunny suit that you used to wear when you were a kid to sleep in. It's a thick piece of neoprene, about 1/2 inch thick, and you roll it on, and it comes up to here. It has little suspenders to keep it up. It's body tight, so that if you fall into the water on the slick rocks, it won't fill with water and drown you. In fact, it's somewhat buoyant, so you might just float down the stream and go over the waterfall instead of drowning. Over the booties of the waders, you wear heavy boots, canvas boots, which have felt on the sole so that you won't slip on the slick rocks. So that's the basis of it. This keeps you dry and warm because the trout streams are quite cold. On the top, you wear a fishing vest, which is kind of the central stores of a fisherman. A fishing vest has pockets all over it, maybe 15 or 20 pockets, depending on how much money you're willing to spend. And in each pocket, you keep a different tool for your fly fishing. And then, of course, you have the fishing pole. Now, the fishing pole for fly fishing is one in which the reel, the part that winds up the line, does not do very much work. And that's because when you're fly fishing, the only way that you can present an artificial insect to the trout is with a rather heavy line. So what you do is you take a pole that's 9 feet long, formerly made of bamboo, now made of various kinds of composite carbonates, costing a good deal of money because of the high technology. You take your long pole and you put out 30 or 40 feet of line, and it's a rather heavy line. And then you wave the line in the air so that you can get it where you want. This is not the kind of fishing where you just do one cast and it goes where you want. You have to hold the line up in the air by waving your pole back and forth. And then when it's time, when you see where you want to lay the fly, then you put your arm out and the line snakes forward, lays out in a very flat line on the water, and the fly will drift for 20 or 30 feet if you're very good at it without any pull from the line. So that's the technology of it. On the other end of the line is a very thin piece of monofilament nylon. Actually, it's a tapered piece. It goes from about the width of a piece of sewing thread down to the width of a spider web. And it will break at about 1.5 pounds of tension. You can catch a 5-pound or 10-pound fish on that because the pole is also flexible and acts like a shock absorber. So you have a 9-foot piece of monofilament so that the fish cannot see the line attached to the fly. And then on the very end, you have what we call a fly. And that's where most of the art comes in. In order to create a fly, you take a hook, which of course is a round bent piece of metal. Now, as we do it, we use hooks without barbs. Most hooks that you've seen have a shank a long piece, and a curve, which we call a bend, and then a point. And immediately behind the point, there's what we call a barb, which is the backwards hook that keeps the hook from coming out of the trout's mouth. But if your goal is to let the trout go to preserve a piece of the ecology, then you use a hook without the barb. The flies that we use are exactly the size of an insect, which are very small. They're smaller than the width of my little finger. And they're made of this hook as its basis, and then thread, feathers, and yarn wound around the shank of the hook so that they imitate the image of a fly. There are, as far as I know, there are probably 2,000 different kinds of trout fly, each one designed to look like a different stage of a different species of insect. And they're beautiful to look at, nice to collect, and each has its own name. One of the classics is a royal coachman, which is a lovely fly. It's made with, its tail is made of the hackle feathers of a fighting cock. Then the next little stage of it is called a herl, H-E-R-L, which is made of a single feather from a peacock plume. And it's wrapped around the shank of the hook so that it spreads out and fans out around and makes a herl. And then there's some bright red floss, scarlet red floss, another peacock herl, two wings made from matching quills from a wood duck, little tiny wings that stick up, and then what we call a hackle, which again is made from the neck feathers of a fighting cock, but it's tied in such a way that you tie the end of it in and then you wrap it around and it too fans out. And that's what makes the fly float on the water. It also makes the trout think that it's a fly or an insect flapping its wings. It gives the impression of very rapid movement. And then there's a head which is made of thread and all tied with special hooks. I'm sorry, with special knots. So you can see that this is a complex thing. This is not sitting on a riverbank. This is not the definition of fishing that we ordinarily think of, which is a jerk on one end of the line waiting for a jerk on the other. This is a kind of art that it takes a lifetime to practice. It's something that involves as much work off the water as it does on the water, and it's something that involves an enjoyment and knowledge of nature that's unavailable in any other kind of activity that I know.